Welcome to Schmidt List, a podcast on innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Join host Kurt Schmidt, president of Foundry, as he and his guest share valuable insights and strategies. This is the perfect opportunity to explore fresh ideas to improve yourself and your business. Come join Kurt as he interviews this week's inspiring guest.
Laura, how are you today?
Excellent. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm excited you're here too. So tell me about Leadership Delta, the company you started, and then also what is it all about?
So Leadership Delta we are an organization that works with people and organizations and all things leadership, from personal leadership to teams to organizations. Mm-hmm. And really what we're trying to accomplish is, how do you get stuff, if I could say Schmidt, done? How do you get that done while still maintaining that human-centered organization culture?
That's great. And Leadership Delta is not just a fancy name. Delta is actually a kind of a framework you have, right? So can you explain what Delta means to you and your team?
Absolutely. So it's interesting because the reason I think about Delta is because the leadership team and leadership within organizations doesn't have to be titled leadership, but they are the Delta for change. And when I talk about change, I'm talking about behavior change. So when you think of behavior change, anything change management, people directly go to ADKAR when they're thinking of project management, change management. And so what we have created in terms of behavioral change is really about the being aware of something, self-awareness, and then having that desire to change and the commitment. And then the fourth piece is practicing, but allowing the culture to have that permission to fail. So that's part of the practice component of it. Because I love when people say, oh, I want to lose weight. So that's the awareness part. And then they have the desire, and then they go full bore in, like, I'm going to just eat grains. And then they do it for 2 days and I'm out. It's got to be a part of that behavior. It has to continuously take small pieces to make a bigger impact.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, obviously the last few years have just been completely normal. We haven't had any big shifts in culture or the way people work at all. So it's been pretty plateau for you, I'm guessing, for the last few years.
Yes. We're like, wow, there's no business out there. That's crazy. Everybody's doing everything so great. And
it's all steady as she goes.
Yes.
Yeah. So well, obviously we've had the pandemic and the whole work from home thing, which has affected team building. We've had remote workers. We've had all these things. How has that because you've been doing this a long time, how has that affected this sort of Delta approach that have you made changes to how you're working with clients post-pandemic versus beforehand?
Yes. So it's interesting. Just like everybody in 2020, everybody used the word pivot, right? So you had to figure out, how do we use technology to connect with other people? So we shifted everything online, whether it was within the organizations or our Delta Academy, which is more of a public group. And so everything went online and it was amazing. And then as people started going back, and then it was all about the hybrid, here's where we're at today, is that the pendulum is shifting almost. You're going to have flexibility, but we want you in the office, because people know that when you can make personal connections, it goes a long ways. Yep. Now, if you have a global organization, it's a little trickier, right? Like that, and it's actually a gift that they've had, that people have figured out, how do you build these team connections and human connections through Zoom when you have a global company, or even just a national company. So that's been the shift, is how do you get people to connect online and virtually?
Yeah. And I want to jump into the team building side of this, because obviously there's been a lot of variations in the way people are hiring over the last few years, thanks to obviously the pandemic. And then now the pandemic's over, so we all just go back to normal. Everything just goes back to the way it was, and nobody understands. So I can imagine the idea of team building is even more important these days than it's ever been. Do you feel that way?
Yes, and it's interesting because I just got back from doing an in-person team retreat And it's funny to hear people say, oh, it's so great to be back in person. And yet people want to work from home still. And the other thing is that we're seeing is two things, is that middle management resurgence is happening. I think organizations decided we're going to be a flat organization.
Oh, I love it when they do that.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you can't have 75 direct reports. I don't know, how do you have this human connection with 75 people and do your job? So that's one piece of it. The other piece that I am noticing is that people are wanting to get back into the connections with others. And so when they went to hybrid or went 100% virtual, that mentorship is gone, because the conversations around the water cooler, as you know, is an old saying. I just dated myself there, but then it's where people saw people and met them and got to know them. And so it's going back to that. How do we create mentor programs? And I think that that's becoming a bigger opportunity.
Yeah, because to your point, I think the best mentorship I ever received early on was there was structure to it, but a lot of it came in a form of improv, right? Just randomly saying something that somebody overheard and saying, oh, I've got some advice about that, or, oh, I've dealt with a client issue like that before, and here's how I dealt with it, or things like that.
Right. And you can't just on Zoom, like just if somebody's sitting at their desk and then you pull up, hey, how's it going? You mean that doesn't, you can't do that. It's not the same. And so you've got to figure a way around it. So then everything gets more structured versus the informality of connectivity.
Okay, so let's talk about structure, Laura. What's the idea of a team charter then from your perspective, and why is it important?
It's really important because I think one of the things that we find with teams is people look around the team and say, well, I'm on this team because I am a VP of this or I'm a director of that. They don't know why does a team exist? And nobody really puts a reasoning behind it or a purpose or a vision. This is why this team gets together. So it's important to understand the team charter is about who are we serving? How are we serving them? How are we working together? What are the roles and responsibilities of each of us? Who's accountable? It's kind of the list of this is how we are going to work as a team, and this is our non-negotiables. And I think a lot of teams are struggling with, because of this middle manager resurgence, if you will, we didn't do a very good job of building a bench in organizations. And so people with technical capabilities continue to move up, and then they don't know how to build a team. They don't know how to talk about it and what's important.
Yeah.
So that's what a team charter really does, is it defines it more clearly what the team does and for who and how we work together.
Yeah, I think that's really important because I myself in my career have been on different leadership teams, and to your point, more mid-management teams, right? So I remember being on a director level team, and all the directors would get together from all the different departments, right? But there was no charter. Everybody still had their own personal agenda. So leadership would come in and say, all right, directors, we want you to focus on this one big problem. And it would be, here's a series of problems. But to your point, because there wasn't necessarily a team charter, and I could feel this at the time now that you're bringing this up, is that there wasn't this common approach to how we were going to solve problems as a team. It was, whose superpower in the Justice League here do we use now to solve this problem? Well, this sounds a little bit like QA. So let's have the QA team take the lead on this piece, and then we'll sit around and just judge their performance.
Yeah, that is true. And it's interesting too, because you kind of get put on a team for no reason.
Right.
And then it's a waste of time. So think about all the meetings that people have, and so many of them could be stopped because they shouldn't even be on that team.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's political, right? Or people come from maybe still an old school Jack Welch sort of approach where it's like, well, you're a VP, so you have a title, so you need to be on a committee, or you need to be on a steering committee or a team of people working on internal problems or something. And it's, to your point, it's not They think it's intentional because, well, you have a title, so it is intentional. That's enough.
Right. Or this is how we've always done it.
Well, there you go.
Right? The world is changing, but this is how we've always done it. Okay, that doesn't go together.
Yes. Well, I've heard many places say whatever's wrong with this place is something that this place can only fix. And it's sure, somewhat true, but you're not actually going to fix it because you have a full-time job. You have a full-time job being a VP of something or a CEO of something. And so what I see end up happening is that the leadership will try to get these teams together and be like, all right, here's a bunch of smart people. Here's the problem. And I airdrop you in and you go and you solve those problems. And why doesn't that ever work, Laura?
Well, I think part of it is because, first of all, there's a lot of peacocking going on. If I can say that on the show, I don't know if that's inappropriate.
Nope.
Because that is still how people get promoted, is by being the bigger voice or that's their idea.
Squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it doesn't fit. And so I think that's the bulk of it, is really that people don't know what they're expected to do as a team, and that they're not looking out for the team or the organization. They're looking out for number one, which is themselves.
Yep. Well, especially in cross-functional teams, right, where you've got maybe sales and engineering. Sales is like, well, you wouldn't exist if it wasn't for my sales. And engineering is like, you wouldn't exist if it wasn't for my engineering. You've got your chocolate and my peanut butter, blah, 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 blah. And leaders, I've heard this before, right? Well, they're adults. And so they should be able to figure it out. And I'm like, that's not leadership. Just saying, yeah, I can see they're adults. Like, they're not wearing diapers. I can see that. It doesn't mean that they know how to work together. That's your job, is to figure that out.
Right. And so go ahead.
I was just going to say, is that when people call leadership delta? Is that when they're seeing those types of problems? Is that when usually people are reaching out to you and saying, you know what, we can't fix this ourselves, Laura. Can you come in and do this? Is that usually this? Are they already, I'm guessing they're already down the path and feeling the pain, and because they thought they could do it on their own, and then they're reaching out to you? Or are they clairvoyant and saying, you know what, before we even do this, before we even talk about it, let's bring in Leadership Delta to help us figure this out? How does it work for you?
It's interesting. We usually get the call, like, and I use this loosely, but we'll get the call and they'll say, hey, Laura, we've got a problem and Bob is our problem. They usually just pick on one person.
Right, yeah.
It's always one person.
Yeah.
And they say, can you come in and fix Bob?
Yeah.
Like, great. Let me have a conversation with Bob. And then the other part is, let's assess the rest of the team. And sometimes we'll go into the organization to assess the organization so you can find the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
I would say 99% is usually more than Bob. And it's a culture that they've created within their teams or within their organizations. And so it's easier to get a call to say, there's something wrong with Bob, come fix him, can you coach him? Right? That's the call you get. And you say, well, Bob is connected to all these other people who have built this culture.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody wants to talk about culture. For some reason, that term has become taboo. It's just too much, too big.
No. Well, that's why, again, I've said this on the show a million times to audience. This is why digital transformation exists, right? Because digital transformation, there's nothing digital about it. It's cultural, organizational change. But the thing is to get these old white guy CEOs to buy something. They're not going to buy culture because that's too woo-woo.
Right.
But they're going to digital transformation. Wow, that sounds like a 4x4 pickup truck. Like, I'll buy that. That sounds great. Your culture transformation, your DI initiatives, and those things sound a bit like a Prius. And I can't be seen hiring a Prius to solve my problems. And so I see that happening pretty regularly. But both you and I know, as people who actually come in and solve those problems, behind closed doors, they're like, yeah, it's these people don't know how to work together.
Right. Right.
But,
and then that's when they call you and say, go fix this.
Go fix Bob.
Where's your role in this?
Everybody's complaining about Bob, so let's get Bob fixed. And it's like, I think the problem is everybody complaining and not doing their job. Maybe that's the problem.
Yes. Or there are too many meetings. They don't know how to run a meeting, first of all, and what is
do.
And
So
I mean, I could just keep going on and on.
No. So if I call you, Laura, and I say, okay, yeah, I want to know more about this team charter idea, this thing, how does the engagement start? Like, where do you start? Do you go in and audit things? Do you just come in and start saying, all right, you sit there and we're going to do this? How does it work? How does it feel for the client when they bring you in?
So the initial conversations really are at an individual level. So I can best understand from an individual level on the team to figure out where's everybody's perspective. And then I usually get them together. And here's the best part. I'll go in and I'll say, well, what do you think is holding us back from getting this done? And nobody talks about trust, that they have a fear culture or a fear of bringing up things that might not align with the CEO or might not align with the executive. So to me, that is they're living in this fear and they're not bringing it up. When you don't bring things up, it goes underground.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't just die.
Right. No, it gets worse, right? Then it just gets bigger.
Right. Festers, it gets infected.
Yes. So that is where we start is we start to talk about trust and we start talking about emotional intelligence and what that looks like, because that's a big part of it. Those two pieces alone are our biggest opportunities and our biggest challenges on team. Yeah.
I've had people argue with me before about this, Laura, and I want to get your take, which is, can you teach emotional intelligence? Have you seen improvement in that? Some people I talk to are like, you got to be born with it. Charisma, you can't, and that sort of thing, you can't really teach people. And I'm like, I think it's different than that. What's your take?
Well, I wouldn't have a job if I didn't say it could be teachable, but I do truly believe that leadership skills, again, going back to, do you have the desire to change? Right? Awareness is a part of emotional intelligence. So that's a piece of it. But then do you have the desire to change? And what is your commitment? Because sometimes you're going to look stupid because you're going to be vulnerable or you're going to be transparent that you don't understand something. But the more you can do that as a leader, people will start to follow you because they see you as not being perfect and having all the answers.
Right.
And that's a big part of emotional intelligence, right? That awareness moves all the way to relationship management, which is the empathy and concern for others and direction, all of those things. So it's kind of on a linear scale, if you will. Once you can figure out your self-awareness, social awareness, and then really work on the self-management and the relationship management.
Yeah, because I think in many of the, at least C-suite people that I've talked to in the past, they don't really understand the weight that they carry when they're walking around in these places. They're like, what? I'm just like you. Hey, how you doing? Let's get some lunch. They don't understand the weight that they carry. They're like elephants that think they're the size of a mouse. And I'm just going to sit in on this. And it's like, you've just changed the entire dynamic of the meeting and the thing. And they're like, what? No, what? Not who? Little old me?
Right.
Yeah. So I think to your point, it's that awareness, first of all, that they've got to have of the impact that they have as those leaders, because they might think that that emotional intelligence isn't as important because it's kind of, to them, it's sort of the sand between the boulders, right? Like, oh, I make these big decisions and these little niceties aren't quite as important. But you and I both know, and you've probably seen this is a real key to retention over time for employees, right? Is that you really like your boss. And you feel safe. You feel safe there, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I do think one of the things you have to remember is leadership is it's an art and a science. So whenever you have both of those, you can make a difference, but you have to choose to make the difference. And I think some of us are born with more leadership skills, what we would depict as leadership skills. Some of us are born with more athletic ability. Some of us are born with more art and creative and writing, whatever it is, right? We're born with certain opportunities or certain gifts is what I like to call them. And so some of us that have that leadership gift, maybe you only have to continue to develop it a little bit, where some have to maybe develop it a lot more.
Yeah.
But it's still developable, if that's even a word. I don't know if developable is a word. I'm going to use it.
It should be. It should be. With hashtag Laura Boy, hashtag.
Yeah.
But So the idea of, and again, you understand, because I'm sure a lot of the businesses you work with are fast moving companies trying to innovate. And a lot of times those decisions on those teams and those other things are just to fill gaps. They're really not as intentional. And the place where these people land starts way back in the initial decision-making of like, how am I as a boss going to solve a problem? I could bring in an outside person. I could create an internal team. I could hire somebody full-time to come in and do these things. And a lot of outside forces affect how they make those decisions. And sometimes those outside forces change rapidly, right? Sometimes it's all gravy and money's falling from the sky, and other times they're super strapped. But the problems don't go away, the gaps don't go away. And so they still need to solve those problems. So they're solving them in lots of different ways and not being as intentional maybe as they should be. So I'm guessing when you're coming in and you're talking about building a team charter, how do you, okay, here's my team charter. You're all here for this reason I'll talk to you later. I'm guessing there's some more maintenance to it than just kind of establishing a North Star for a team and going forward. How do I make sure that gap has actually been filled with a team charter, Laura?
So I think that is where you go back to anything that you're doing should align to the strategy and the culture. And you as an executive have that opportunity to make sure that that's happening in your organization or on your teams. Is what is our strategy and what's the culture? And then the systems, process, and structure need to align with that. So when you think of this team charter, it is about using that as a framework or a guideline to lead us as a team. So when we talk about who are our key stakeholders, who are our key customers, what are our expected results, that should all be aligned to the strategy. Which if you think about meetings and how you're moving forward, I mean, strategy is just a conscious set of choices, but people see it as a 500-page document that I'm just going to store in my file system.
Yes, an employee handbook, perhaps.
Yes, right? And it's not that. It is about, these are the expectations that we are required to produce. And so when you do that, then it is about pulling it out often to talk about how are we doing on our team purpose, our team norms, our non-negotiables, because that's where you can start to dig into the trust and the emotional intelligence around the team, effective communication.
Sure. So let's say I am listening to this and I'm like, wow, it makes a lot of sense, everything you're saying, Laura. Before I bring someone of your talent and expertise in, what are some suggestions or advice you have for me to maybe start working on those problems internally that I might see? What are some things, obviously bringing in you and your team is going to accelerate a lot of any change and gaps that you want to fill. But what should I be thinking about and what advice would you give me now before I make that call?
Honestly, I'm going to be honest with you. The team charter is something that people could look at and they could facilitate the team on their own. So we actually have a model and a framework that we're willing to share with anybody, because if you could take this and you could run your teams with this information and continue to run your teams, you would see a difference. You would see a difference because what you're doing is you're opening dialogue, which allows you to have trust on your teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just so everybody's listening, we will have links in the description below for Laura's sharing that team charter, and you can find it. You'll be able to find it in there, so you can try it out and flex it yourself. And if you have questions, obviously you can reach out to Laura at Leadership Delta. So last question, Laura, I want to talk to you about, where do you, with the pandemic sort of rolling down and a lot of people sort of either demanding people come back in the office or being wishy-washy and being like, okay, I'll meet you halfway and you come in halftime, or people who are like, screw it, I don't want to pay for a brick and mortar building anymore. We're all going to fly to the wind, right? It's be free. There's all sorts of approaches that people are taking pandemic. Where do you see the future going, and what advice would you give leaders to really focus on and pay attention to in the next 6 months, year, in terms of culture and leadership?
That's a great question, because, leadership goes back millions of years. And honestly, it hasn't changed. The ideals of leadership hasn't changed, if we're being honest. That's why I love it so much. But anyway, that's beside the point. Mm-hmm. So I think what happens is It's the opportunities that allow people to show their leadership and show their influence. So the challenge that we're having is that we have to treat each other how they want to be treated. So it's kind of like the golden rule was like, treat others how you want to be treated. And now it's the platinum rule to say, treat others as they want to be treated. Mm-hmm. And there might be some instances that it works better for someone to work from home. You might get, more productivity. You might get somebody that's more committed to the process, or you might say this group wants to come in. And so I think what's going to happen is I think it's going to be a hybrid when it can be. I think that there's going to be more hoteling. Here's a great example. Oh, I just love this. Somebody said they wanted, because they were coming in, they wanted to go to the office. They said, I want to be in the office. And they never asked someone to say, could I have my own desk because I'm coming in 3-4 days a week, because the organization said we're hoteling the desks. But this person never felt the opportunity that they could ask their boss to say, can I have my own desk since I'm coming in 3-4 days a week? And then they died.
Wow. That's amazing.
We've got to set up cultures where people that we're checking in with them too. Like, how are things going? And hopefully that person would feel comfortable enough to say, gosh, I really would like my own desk. Wow, that is an easy fix. Let's do that.
Right.
So that's what I really encourage people to ask for what they need.
Yeah. Yep.
And then it gives the other person the choice to say yes or no. Yeah.
And don't be afraid, because as my father always told me, you get 100% of what you don't ask for. So
yes,
if you don't at least put it out in the universe is never going to respond to the thoughts in your head. And it's really important. Okay. Last things, Laura, if I want to get in touch with you and Leadership Delta and learn more about the work that you do, and maybe talk to you about maybe potentially coming and helping out my team, where's a great place to connect with you and find you?
I think, to learn a little bit more about our organization, you can go to leadershipdelta.com or reach out to me personally. It's Laura@leadershipdelta.com. Very easy. We've got a team. I can get everybody moving in the right direction and we can move forward. But I have seen it be successful. It's been really fun to be part of the success when we have great case studies on retention. And when you can drop $2.5 million to the bottom line in 1 year based on a 4% increase in retention, those are good days.
It feels good. Well, I appreciate you, Laura, and the work you do. You've got an amazing reputation, and I just thank you for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And thanks for having this podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to get you back on sometime. We'll have to talk about what's going to happen in 2024.
Sounds good.
We appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode of Schmidt List. The stories shared by our guests are genuinely inspiring and offer insightful knowledge. It's important to remember that success doesn't happen overnight and requires collaboration, learning, and perseverance. If you want to broaden your professional connections, check out Kurt's book, The Little Book of Networking: How to Build Your Career One Conversation at a Time, on Amazon. Please stay connected with all things Schmidt List on social media, leave a review for the podcast, and join our community of like-minded entrepreneurs. Thank you for being part of Schmidt List. Keep innovating, collaborating, and chasing your entrepreneurial dreams.